In this video, I'm going to go through our third example of transforming square root functions. So again, let's just start with, say, f of x is equal to the square root of x, and I transform it to g of x, which is equal to, in this example, what do I have it set as? I have it as 2 the square root of 6 minus 2x plus 1. All right, so once again, remember, because we start off with our parent function, which is the simplest function, we can pretty much read off our transform function what the transformations are. So the reflections, the stretches, and the translations. So, and the other thing that I mentioned in the last video is always make sure that inside the square root or inside the function that you're doing, is make sure it's factored. In this case, it's clearly not factored. 6 minus 2x is not factored. So what we're going to do is the first thing is we're going to factor it. So I'm going to put a big square root, and what I'm going to factor out is the coefficient in front of x. And since this is x, the coefficient in front of x is negative 2. So that's negative 2, and then that's going to be x, because negative 2 times x is negative 2x. And then negative 2 times what will give me 6? Well, that's minus 3. And then you close it, and then it's plus 1. And now we're ready to go. Now we're ready to sort of read off what the transformations are. So let's find out what the transformations are. So first, let's look at any reflections. So the first thing is we see that there's a negative on the inside, which means it affects the x's, so which means that it's a reflection across the y-axis. So it's a reflection across y-axis, or I should have written d, but whatever. Okay, so it's reflection across the y-axis, and that's good. Then we can see that there are two stretches. We actually see a stretch in the y direction by a factor of 2. So it's a stretch in the y direction by a factor of 2. Again, I'm just writing that just to save space, but again, you understand why. And then now, since this 2 is inside, remember, we take the reciprocal of it. So the third one, we still continue with the stretch. So it's stretch in the x direction by a factor of 1/2, right? All the x's will now be multiplied by 1/2 and not by 2. Remember that. And finally, the last thing is the translation. So translate by, and what we can tell directly from here is that it's 3 to the right, because remember, it's minus 3 to the right, and 1 up, and there we go. All right, so now let's do a step-by-step. You know what? I think in my previous videos, I was showing you how to do it from f of, actually, you know what? I'll just continue with that. That's fine. So let's start with, so here was the original function, which was the square root of x. And we went this way, right? Just to remind ourselves what square root of x looks like, just starts this way. Now, g of x, let's see what that looks like. So I just need that. Perfect. So let me just draw my axes first. Let me just scroll up just a little bit, and there we go. Oops, it's down a little bit. Okay, so there we go. So so now we're going to use these instructions to help us how to transform this original function to g of x. So we started off this way, right? This is our original square root function. First is a reflection across the y-axis. So I'm going to draw that in blue over here. So this is a reflection across the y-axis. I'm going to take care of that. And then, once again, use a pencil just to make sure you erase the old one, just kind of so you see the transformations as they're happening. Okay? And so that's a reflection across the y-axis. Then there's a stretch in the y direction by 2. So what that means is that if I'm stretching in the y direction by 2, it's still going to point in the same direction, but now just going to be a little bit higher, right? Because all the y's have been increased by 2. And, oops, so what I'm going to do there, oops, is I'm going to check that off, and I'm going to erase the older blue one. All right, so I'm going to erase that one, right? And then there's a stretch in the x direction by 1/2, which means that everything sort of gets, sort of shrunk in this direction by 1/2. So let me get blue again, and it's sort of going to look a little bit like, well, it's going to look kind of like this, right? Remember, this is just a rough sketch in any case, so all I'm doing is just kind of getting an idea of how things are going. So if it's not exactly accurate, remember, it's not to scale, so I don't really have to worry. I'm just trying to get a rough idea of where things are. And again, so I'm taking care of that. Next, it's translate to the right by 3. So I'm going to translate to the right by 3. So here's 3, for example. And I'm going to translate it to the right. Boom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase the older one. Okay. And so, oops. So I've taken care of that. So I've taken care of the 3. And now it's up by 1. So since it's up by 1, there you go. So it's going to go up by 1 over there. And what I'm going to do now is just erase the old function, which is that right there. Oops. Excuse me over there. So that's 3. And therefore, this point has a coordinate of 3, 1, and it's simply going in that direction. And once you have that, you can pretty much determine the domain and range. And there we go. We've now plotted what g of x looks like. Again, use a pencil and keep erasing and all that kind of stuff just to get a good idea of the indication of where it's going. All right, and I'll see you in the next video with our final example of transformations of the square root parent function.